In this video, we're going to look at creating our very first avatar character with an AI behavior component assigned to it. There's just a couple of steps that we need to go through before we get to it. The one thing we want to do is set up a plane inside the scene, a light in the scene, and then we're going to drag in our avatar prefab that's empty into the scene and then set it up. So we'll start in our hierarchy view. We're just going to create a plane in the scene. We'll go ahead and create a directional light to give us a little light source to work with. We'll drag this up a little. We'll turn on our game mode here, and we'll select on our plane. Okay, so the scene is set up and ready to go. Let's go ahead and grab our avatar empty from our project prefabs. We'll drag him into the scene. Our character is now in the scene and ready to go. I'm just going to center our plane here in the scene as well. There we go. Now the plane is in the scene, the avatar is in the scene. Let's select on our avatar. Let's assign our AI component. So we're going to go to component. The first one on the list is going to be our AI. We're going to go to our AI behavior default setup, which is going to assign everything we need to get started. So we see 4 components have been assigned to it. We have a nav mesh agent, which is part of Unity's system, which allows us to tie into navigating and moving, pathing our character around. If we take a look at that one, the basic properties are set. This is just fine for us. The thing that we need to do, though, is we need to assign and or create a nav mesh out of the plane that we put into the scene. So you can go to your window, to your navigation button, or you can go ahead and go to your navigation tab, which I have set up over here. The basic default properties are just fine for us. Now if we were just to click bake, it's not going to bake anything for us. We need to make sure that that plane is set on static. So I'm going to click on the static button, back to my navigation, click on my bake. This is going to bake it in for us. We can see inside the scene the little blue box that goes around lets us know that we've got a nav mesh in the scene. We can turn that on and off through our nav mesh display. Alright, back over to the inspector. Back up to our avatar empty. That means that we have satisfied the needs of the nav mesh agent, and we can move on to our AI behavior animation states. These are the different states and or animations that are used with the states of our behaviors. So the first one is 3D. Is this a 3D animation? Yes, it is. If it's not a 3D animation and we're using a sprite based animation, then we can uncheck that and tie into the system that we're using. In order to use it, we simply add. Add's going to add it to a list. We have a U for up, D for down, so we can move them up and down the list, or remove. We'll start by labeling the animations. Now what name do we need to call these, to label these? Well, we need to label these the same as the ones that are inside of our mesh animation. So if we look inside of our avatar to our mesh, we can see that the animation file is attack M or attack R for melee or ranged. So let's go ahead and label this set the same thing. So attack, and this will be the melee. Our speed is at 1. The animation wrap mode is a loop, so we'll leave it on our loop. And then we'll go ahead and just create a handful of the ones that we'll need for our other files. We'll go in. This is going to be our attack ranged with a looping animation. This will be our death, fall to knees, very dramatic. Now this is going to be a non-looping animation, so we'll set it to the default. And then we'll continue on down with the rest of the list. Okay, with everything labeled, we are ready to move on to our next component. This allows us to have all of these animations to be able to be used within the AI behavior script. So we'll go ahead and lower that down. The next one that we can look at is the AI behaviors. This one we're only going to touch on the properties that are persistent throughout each behavior, and a general idea of how it actually functions. When we look at it, AI Behaviors has at the top of it a list of different states that the avatar can be in. They don't all necessarily have to be used, but the ones that we do want to use we can have checked, and we can leave them all checked as long as they're not strung together. They won't get used. So in order to go through each one and edit each one, we have an edit button next to the state. If you look down at the bottom here, we have a little header that says an idle state and the properties of that idle state. If we select on a patrol, changes to a patrol state and the properties of the patrol. So by simply selecting on the edit, it changes up the properties down below and lets you edit on each one. The next thing we'll look at is the items in here that are persistent. The player tags. The player tags are what this avatar is going to look for inside of the scene. If it's going to be looking to follow a character or chase a character, then it's going to be using these tags that we set up. So we can set up multiple tags by clicking on the Add button. We can adjust those tags through our drop down. And if we don't want to use them, then we can simply remove them from the list and leave them with the ones that we want. Below that, we've got initial starting state. This is the state that the character is going to start in when you begin playing. The initial idle state is the default, but we could set it to, let's say it was supposed to immediately start following the player object or whatever object that we had on the tag. It would start off with a follow, or if you were patrolling in the very beginning, you could start with a patrol. By default, though, the idle is set. The next thing we have are a couple of general AI properties. These are things that we use for line of sight and raycasting to look for the different layers on the objects. So the raycast layers, right now everything is set. We may be raycasting and checking for maybe just the player if we're taking that out of the mix. The other things that we have are the use sight fall off. So is there a fall off on the line of sight? If there is, we can check that one. The sight distance, this one, if you'll notice inside of the scene view, is a little yellow line that lets you know how far can this player see. So if we want to limit that range, we can always just bump that back down to something that's more within reason for whatever game project you're working on. The sight field of view is just the peripheral view of the character and how far across. The 180 gives us a range left to right. We can decrease that if we need to. The eye position is from where does this character see. And if we need to raise this or lower this, we can do that generally from the Y direction here. Below that, we have an option that says no component with a health property found. Currently, we haven't assigned a script that includes a health property. Because that, it's letting us know that, hey, if you do have a health property, it'll look for it. If you don't, then it's just going to give you the message that says there's not one on there and you might want to assign one. We also have an example box here just to give you a basic idea of what we're talking about. C#, this is what we're looking for to set up for the health, or JavaScript, this is what we're looking for the health property. Now, if you are to assign the health component to this, and we'll go ahead and do that so we can see it. We'll go over to our scripts, and inside of our scripts we have a player stats. So let's go ahead and just assign that to our character, and let's see if we can find a little spot down here at the bottom to drop it on. And when we do, that goes away, and it gives us a little drop box that says, okay, the health is now using the player stats script, and the health is inside of that script to be used with the player. And the last option that we have is our animation component callback, and those two options are set up and ready for it. Alright, the next thing that we're going to look at in our next video is all the different states and the properties in each one and how they function. We'll do that next.